The old leather jacket creaked as Sarah Mitchell pushed through the heavy wooden door of Murphy's Tavern. The dim lighting hit her face, revealing sharp features weathered by 3 tours in Afghanistan. At 28, she carried herself with the confident stride of someone who had seen combat and lived to tell about it. Her short brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and her green eyes scanned the room with automatic precision. Murphy's wasn't the kind of place Marines usually hung out. Located in the rougher part of downtown Portland, it attracted a different crowd: construction workers, truckers, and locals who preferred their drinks strong and their conversations louder than necessary. Sarah had chosen this place specifically because she wanted to drink alone, away from the base, away from questions about her recent medical discharge. The bar stretched along the left wall, its surface scarred by years of use. Neon beer signs cast colored shadows across the room, and the smell of stale cigarettes lingered despite the smoking ban. Sarah chose a stool at the far end, near a window that looked out onto the rain-soaked street. The bartender, a man in his 50s with graying hair and tired eyes, approached without enthusiasm. "What'll it be?" he asked, wiping his hands on a dirty towel. "Whiskey. Make it a double," Sarah replied, her voice carrying the slight rasp of someone who had spent years shouting orders over gunfire and helicopter rotors. As the bartender poured, Sarah's mind drifted back to the conversation she'd had with her commanding officer 3 weeks ago. The words still echoed in her head like shrapnel. Medical discharge, post-traumatic stress, unfit for duty. The irony wasn't lost on her. She had survived roadside bombs, firefights, and missions behind enemy lines, only to be defeated by her own mind. The whiskey burned as it went down, a familiar fire that reminded her of the cheap liquor they used to smuggle into the barracks. She ordered another, then another. The alcohol helped quiet the voices in her head, the constant replay of her last mission when everything went wrong. At the other end of the bar sat a woman who looked completely out of place. While everyone else wore work clothes or casual attire, she was dressed in an expensive black dress and heels. Her blonde hair was perfectly styled, and she held her martini glass with manicured fingers. To most observers, she appeared to be a wealthy businesswoman who had wandered into the wrong neighborhood. Her name was Elena Vasquez, though the ID in her purse said Jennifer Walsh. At 31, she was a senior operative for the Defense Intelligence Agency, currently deep undercover investigating a weapons trafficking ring that used bars like Murphy's as meeting points. She had been working this case for 6 months, carefully building relationships with the criminal network that moved illegal firearms across the Pacific Northwest. Elena's cover story was simple but effective. She was a recently divorced real estate developer looking for investment opportunities in Portland's revitalization projects. The story gave her reasons to be in different neighborhoods at odd hours, to meet with various people, and to ask questions about property values and development plans. What the criminals didn't know was that their weapons storage facilities were often located in abandoned buildings that showed up in property records. Tonight was supposed to be a routine surveillance operation. Elena was waiting for Mickey Torino, a mid-level player in the trafficking ring who used Murphy's as his office. He was due to arrive at 9:30 to meet with a contact about a shipment coming in from overseas. Elena's job was to listen, take mental notes, and report back to her handlers. The plan had been working perfectly until the 3 men walked in. They entered like they owned the place, their presence immediately changing the atmosphere in the bar. The leader was a large man with a shaved head and arms covered in tattoos. His companions flanked him on either side, both wearing leather jackets and displaying the casual arrogance of people accustomed to intimidating others. Elena recognized them from her surveillance files. The leader was Danny Kowalski, Torino's enforcer and right-hand man. The other 2 were local muscle hired for specific jobs. Their early arrival meant something had changed in the operation, and Elena felt her pulse quicken as she tried to appear disinterested. Sarah noticed the shift in atmosphere too, though for different reasons. Her combat-trained senses picked up the tension, the way conversations became quieter, the way other patrons seemed to shrink into themselves. She had seen this before in Afghan villages when the Taliban entered. The unmistakable feeling of predators among prey. Kowalski approached the bar and slammed his hand down, making the bottles rattle. "Jimmy," he called to the bartender. Give me and my boys 3 beers, and make sure they're cold. The bartender moved quickly, clearly nervous. Coming right up, Danny. While waiting for their drinks, Kowalski's attention wandered around the room, eventually settling on Elena. His eyes lingered on her expensive clothes and jewelry, calculating their worth. In his world, everything and everyone had a price. Well, he said loud enough for the entire bar to hear. Looks like we got ourselves a fancy lady slumming it with us regular folk. Elena continued to stare at her martini, hoping he would lose interest. She had dealt with men like this before, and experience had taught her that engaging only made things worse. Her training emphasized blending in, avoiding confrontation, and maintaining her cover at all costs. But Kowalski wasn't the type to be ignored. He approached Elena's end of the bar, his companions following like loyal dogs. Hey, princess, I'm talking to you. I'm just having a drink. Elena replied quietly, not looking up. I'm not bothering anyone. No, you're bothering me by being here, Kowalski said, his voice growing louder. This ain't the kind of place for your type. Maybe you should take your fancy clothes and go find yourself a wine bar. Several other patrons watched the confrontation unfold, but none made any move to intervene. This was Kowalski's territory, and everyone knew it. Even the bartender pretended to be busy cleaning glasses, unwilling to draw attention to himself. Sarah continued drinking, trying to ignore the situation. She had enough problems without getting involved in someone else's drama. The alcohol was finally starting to work, creating a warm fog that dulled the sharp edges of her memories. She just wanted to finish her drinks and go back to her empty apartment. You know what I think? Kowalski continued, now standing directly beside Elena's stool. I think you're lost. Maybe you need someone to give you directions. He reached out and grabbed Elena's wrist, his grip tight enough to bruise. Come on, sweetheart. Let me and my boys show you where you belong. Elena's training kicked in immediately. She could have broken his wrist in 3 different ways, could have put him on the ground before his friends knew what happened. But doing so would blow her cover and potentially destroy months of careful work. She had to play the helpless victim, no matter how much it went against every instinct. Please let go, she said, allowing fear to creep into her voice. I don't want any trouble. Too late for that. Kowalski laughed, pulling her off the stool. You came to the wrong place on the wrong night. That was when Sarah's military training overrode her personal problems. She had sworn an oath to protect the innocent, and despite her discharge, despite her PTSD, despite the whiskey clouding her judgment, she couldn't sit by and watch a woman be assaulted. The warrior in her, the Marine who had charged machine gun nests and rescued wounded comrades, suddenly surfaced through the haze of alcohol and self-pity. Let her go, Sarah said, her voice cutting through the bar's ambient noise like a blade. Kowalski turned, surprised by the interruption. He looked Sarah up and down, taking in her civilian clothes and slight build. At 5'6" and 130 pounds, she didn't look particularly threatening. Mind your own business, lady. I'm making it my business, Sarah replied, sliding off her stool. The alcohol had loosened her inhibitions, but sharpened her focus. I said let her go. Or what? Kowalski laughed, still gripping Elena's wrist. You gonna call the cops? They don't come to this part of town, sweetheart. Sarah took a step forward, her posture changing subtly. Anyone with military experience would have recognized the shift, the way her weight balanced on the balls of her feet, how her hands positioned themselves for quick movement. But Kowalski saw only a small woman who had clearly been drinking. Last warning, Sarah said quietly. Elena watched the confrontation with growing alarm. She could see the tactical awareness in Sarah's movements, the way she held herself like someone with combat training. This wasn't some random Good Samaritan. This was someone dangerous, someone who might escalate the situation beyond Elena's ability to control. Sarah, don't, Elena said, surprising both women by using a name she couldn't possibly know. The slip came from her intelligence training, her habit of quickly profiling everyone in her environment. But she caught herself too late. The momentary confusion gave Kowalski the opening he was looking for. Looks like you two know each other, he said with a nasty grin. Maybe we should have ourselves a party. He made a gesture to his companions, and they began to move forward, surrounding the two women. The bar had gone completely silent now, with even the jukebox seeming to sense the tension. Sarah's vision narrowed to include only the threats in front of her. Her pulse slowed rather than quickened, a reaction drilled into her by years of combat training. Time seemed to stretch as she calculated distances, angles, and potential weapons within reach. "Big mistake," she whispered. What happened next took less than 5 seconds, but would haunt everyone present for years to come. Sarah moved like liquid lightning. Her right hand shot forward in a perfect jab that connected with Kowalski's solar plexus, driving the air from his lungs and forcing him to release Elena's wrist. Before he could recover, her left hook caught him on the side of the jaw with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon. Kowalski dropped like a stone, his massive frame crashing into tables and chairs on his way to the floor. The sound echoed through the bar like thunder. The first of Kowalski's companions rushed forward, pulling a knife from his jacket. Sarah sidestepped his clumsy attack and brought her knee up into his ribs, feeling them crack under the impact. A quick elbow to the back of his neck sent him to the floor beside his boss. The third man hesitated, suddenly, realizing he was facing someone far more dangerous than he had anticipated. That moment of doubt was all Sarah needed. She grabbed a beer bottle from the nearest table and shattered it across his forehead. He went down hard and stayed down. The entire fight lasted exactly 4.5 seconds. 3 grown men lay unconscious on the floor, and Sarah stood over them breathing normally, seemingly unaffected by the violence she had just unleashed. Elena stared in shock, her cover identity completely forgotten. In 20 seconds, she had watched a slightly drunk woman dismantle 3 hardened criminals with the efficiency of a trained killer. The precision, the speed, the absolute lack of hesitation. This was not the work of an amateur. "Jesus Christ," the bartender whispered, speaking for everyone in the room. Sarah looked around the bar, suddenly aware of what she had done. The alcohol fog lifted as adrenaline flooded her system, bringing with it a crushing wave of regret. She had just exposed herself, probably broken several laws, and, worst of all, she had enjoyed it. The violence had felt good. For the first time since her discharge, she had felt useful, competent, alive. That realization terrified her more than any enemy fire ever had. "I need to go," she said to no one in particular. She threw a $20 bill on the bar and headed for the door, pushing past the stunned onlookers. Elena watched her leave, her mind racing through the implications of what she had witnessed. This Sarah, whoever she was, had just severely compromised what was supposed to be a simple surveillance operation. But, as the door swung shut behind the mysterious woman, Elena realized her problems were just beginning. Mickey Torino chose that moment to walk through the front door, and his reaction to seeing his enforcer and 2 soldiers unconscious on the floor was immediate and predictable. "What the hell happened here?" he roared, his hand moving instinctively toward the gun concealed beneath his jacket. The bartender stammered out a quick explanation while Elena tried to blend back into the background. But it was too late. Torino's paranoid mind was already working, looking for connections and conspiracies. A strange woman shows up, his men get taken down. And now there's a witness in expensive clothes who clearly doesn't belong. "Nobody leaves," Torino announced, pulling out his weapon. "We're going to figure this out right now." Elena's mind raced through her options. Her backup was 20 minutes away. Her weapon was concealed, but accessible. She could try to maintain her cover or abandon it entirely. Each choice carried enormous risks. Outside, Sarah walked quickly through the rain, her hands shaking as delayed shock set in. She had just done exactly what the military psychiatrist said she would do. She had used excessive force, acted without thinking, allowed her training to override her civilian judgment. 3 blocks from the bar, she stopped under a streetlight and pulled out her phone. She stared at the number for her therapist, thumb hovering over the call button. Dr. Martinez had warned her about situations like this, about the danger of falling back into old patterns. But, as she stood there in the rain, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that she had just stumbled into something much bigger than a simple bar fight. The woman she had helped, Elena, had known her name somehow. And the way she had carried herself, the subtle signs Sarah's trained eye had picked up, suggested she wasn't the helpless victim she had pretended to be. Back at Murphy's, Elena was running out of time and options. Torino was questioning everyone in the bar, his paranoia growing with each inconsistent story. It was only a matter of time before his attention focused on her, and she wasn't sure her cover would hold up under close scrutiny. The three unconscious men were beginning to stir, which would only make things worse. When they came to and described their attacker, Torino would have a better idea of what he was dealing with. Elena needed to get out of there before that happened. She made her decision. Standing up slowly, Elena gathered her purse and moved toward the door. "Excuse me," she said in her most innocent voice. "I think I should call the police about what happened." Torino's eyes fixed on her like laser sights. "I don't think so, lady. Nobody's calling anybody until we figure out who did this to my boys." "But I'm just a witness," Elena protested, staying in character. "I should report what I saw." Elena maintained her composure as Mickey Torino's eyes bore into her like drills. Years of undercover training had taught her that the key to survival was staying calm under pressure. She forced herself to appear nervous, but not too nervous, confused, but not suspicious. "I was just sitting here having my drink," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Then, that big man started bothering me, and this other woman told him to stop. When he wouldn't listen, she just exploded. I've never seen anything like it." Torino studied her face, looking for tells. In his line of work, reading people was a matter of survival. But Elena's cover had been perfected through months of preparation. Every detail of her Jennifer Walsh identity had been crafted by DIA's best specialists, from her credit history to her social media presence. "You didn't know her?" Torino pressed. "The woman who did this?" "No, never saw her before," Elena lied smoothly. "She was sitting at the other end of the bar when I came in. I think she might have been drinking for a while." Meanwhile, Danny Kowalski was groaning as he regained consciousness. Blood trickled from the corner of his mouth, and his jaw was already beginning to swell. The humiliation of being dropped by a woman half his size burned worse than any physical pain. "Danny," Torino called out. "Tell me what happened." Kowalski struggled to his feet, aided by one of his companions who had also begun to stir. "Some crazy bitch sucker-punched me," he mumbled through his damaged jaw. "Had to be military or something. Nobody moves that fast without training." The words sent a chill through Elena's spine. If they started thinking about military connections, it wouldn't take long for them to wonder about other types of government training. Her escape window was closing rapidly. "Military?" Torino's voice carried a dangerous edge. "You sure about that?" "I'm telling you, Mickey, this wasn't no ordinary bar fight." She moved like a pro, like someone who kills people for a living. Torino's paranoia, already elevated by the evening's events, kicked into overdrive. For months, he had suspected that law enforcement was getting close to their operation. Weapons shipments had been delayed, contacts had gone silent, and there were rumors of federal investigations. Now a woman with apparent military training had appeared out of nowhere and taken down his best people. "Lock the door," he ordered one of his men. "Nobody comes in, nobody goes out." Elena watched as her primary escape route was cut off. The bar had only one public entrance, though her surveillance had revealed a service door in the back that led to an alley. But reaching it would mean moving through the entire length of the bar under Torino's suspicious gaze. Outside, Sarah Mitchell was having her own crisis of conscience. 3 blocks from Murphy's, she stood in the rain trying to decide whether to call her therapist, the police, or just go home and pretend the evening had never happened. Her phone buzzed with a text message from her neighbor asking about strange men who had been asking questions about her earlier that day. The message made Sarah's blood run cold. Someone had been looking for her, which meant tonight's encounter might not have been random at all. Her paranoia, sharpened by months of therapy and medication, suggested several possibilities, none of them good. She thought about the woman she had helped, Elena. Something about her hadn't added up. The expensive clothes, the perfect manicure, the way she had moved during the confrontation. Most civilians would have been screaming or crying after witnessing that level of violence. Elena had remained remarkably calm. Sarah made a decision that would change both their lives. Instead of walking away, she turned around and headed back toward Murphy's Tavern. Inside the bar, Torino was becoming increasingly agitated. "Here's what I think happened," he announced to the room. "That military woman was surveillance. She was watching us, and when things got heated, she had to blow her cover to maintain her position. Elena felt sweat beading on her forehead despite the bar's cool temperature. Torino's theory was wrong in its details, but dangerously close to the truth in its implications. If he decided she was also law enforcement, her life expectancy could be measured in minutes. But I'm not with anyone, she protested. I'm just a real estate developer. Look, here's my business card. She reached into her purse, a move that made several of Torino's men tense up and reach for their weapons. Elena withdrew a business card slowly, keeping her movements visible and non-threatening. The card was part of her cover, complete with a working phone number and legitimate business address. Torino examined the card suspiciously. Jennifer Walsh, Pacific Northwest Development Group, he read aloud. Fancy. What's a real estate developer doing in a dump like Murphy's? Elena had rehearsed this answer hundreds of times. I'm scouting this neighborhood for potential development. The city's planning major revitalization projects, and property values are about to go through the roof. I wanted to get a feel for the area before making any investment decisions. It was a plausible story, backed by real documentation. Elena's cover identity owned several investment properties, had permits pending for development projects, and maintained relationships with actual city planners. The DI had spared no expense in creating a bulletproof legend. But Torino was beyond logical reasoning. Years of criminal life had taught him that coincidences were usually conspiracies, and tonight felt like the biggest conspiracy of his career. Check her purse, he ordered. This was the moment Elena had dreaded. Her purse contained items that could potentially blow her cover if examined by someone who knew what to look for. A lipstick that was actually a GPS beacon, a compact mirror with a hidden camera, and, most damning of all, a .38 special in a concealed compartment. Sir, I really don't think, she began. I don't care what you think, Torino snapped. Danny, search her. Kowalski approached with obvious relish, still furious about his humiliation. Elena calculated her options rapidly. She could draw her weapon and try to fight her way out, but she was outnumbered and outgunned. She could try to maintain her cover and hope they missed the hidden compartments. But Kowalski looked like the type who would be very thorough in his search. That was when the lights went out. The bar plunged into complete darkness as someone cut the main power line. Emergency lighting kicked in after a few seconds, bathing everything in an eerie red glow. In the confusion, Elena heard the distinctive sound of the front door's lock being shattered. Sarah Mitchell stood silhouetted in the doorway, and she was no longer the slightly drunk woman who had left 20 minutes earlier. She had gone to her car, retrieved items from her military deployment bag, and made a tactical assessment of the situation. What she found had convinced her that Elena was in serious danger. Gun, someone shouted, and the bar erupted into chaos. Sarah moved through the confusion like a ghost, using the emergency lighting and overturned furniture as cover. Her night vision, trained by countless operations in Afghanistan, adjusted quickly to the dim conditions. She could see Torino's men scrambling for their weapons, could hear Elena's voice calling out her location. A muzzle flash lit up the far corner as one of Torino's soldiers fired blindly into the darkness. The bullet shattered bottles behind the bar, sending glass and alcohol cascading to the floor. The bartender dove for cover, screaming for everyone to stop shooting. Sarah's response was swift and decisive. She had brought her service pistol, legally registered, and carried with her concealed weapons permit. Her first shot took out the man who had fired, a center mass hit that dropped him instantly. Her second shot shattered the overhead light fixture, plunging that section of the bar back into darkness. Elena, she called out. Where are you? Behind the bar, came the reply. Elena had used the confusion to vault over the bar and take cover among the bottles and glassware. Her DIA training had kicked in, and she was no longer playing the helpless businesswoman. She had drawn her concealed weapon and was ready to join the fight. Federal agent, she shouted, finally, abandoning her cover. Everyone on the ground now. The announcement had the opposite effect she intended. Instead of surrendering, Torino's men opened fire in earnest. They had always known this day might come, had planned for the possibility of law enforcement raids. But they had never expected it to happen in a dive bar with two women. Sarah and Elena found themselves fighting side by side without ever having formally met. Their training kicked in automatically. each covering the other's movements with practiced precision. Sarah's military experience complemented Elena's intelligence background perfectly. "Three more behind the pool table," Sarah called out, having spotted muzzle flashes in the mirror behind the bar. "I see them," Elena replied. "Cover me." Elena broke from cover, rolling across the open floor to a position behind an overturned table. Sarah provided suppressing fire, her shots carefully placed to pin down the enemy without hitting Elena. It was like a deadly ballet, choreographed by years of training and executed with lethal precision. Torino himself had taken cover behind the jukebox, frantically trying to coordinate his remaining men. He could hear sirens in the distance. Someone had finally called the police. His carefully constructed criminal empire was falling apart around him, and he blamed the two women who had turned his routine evening into a war zone. "Kill them both," he screamed over the gunfire. "Don't let them take us alive." But his men were dying around him. Sarah and Elena had superior training, better positioning, and, most importantly, they were fighting to save lives rather than protect criminal interests. One by one, Torino's soldiers fell to their combined assault. The fight lasted exactly 7 minutes from start to finish. When the shooting stopped, 4 men were dead and 3 others were wounded too badly to continue fighting. Only Torino remained, cowering behind the jukebox with an empty pistol. Sarah and Elena approached him carefully, their weapons trained on his position. The bar looked like a battlefield, with bullet holes in every surface and debris scattered across the floor. The smell of gunpowder and spilled alcohol created a nauseating mixture that would haunt both women's dreams. "It's over," Elena called out. "Come out with your hands up." Torino emerged slowly, his hands raised but his face twisted with rage. "You think this changes anything? You think you've won something here? We've stopped you," Sarah said simply. "That's enough." "Stopped me?" Torino laughed bitterly. "Lady, you have no idea how big this thing is. I'm just one small part of something much larger. They're gonna come for you now. Both of you." The sirens were getting closer, and Elena could see flashing lights through the bar's front window. She needed to establish control of the scene before local police arrived and potentially compromised her operation. "Sarah," she said, using the name she had somehow known earlier. "We need to talk." Sarah looked at her suspiciously. "How do you know my name?" "Because I know who you are, Sergeant Mitchell. Former Marine, 3 tours in Afghanistan, recently discharged for PTSD. You live alone, drive a 2019 Honda Civic, and you've been seeing Dr. Martinez for therapy twice a week." The detailed knowledge hit Sarah like a physical blow. "Who are you?" "Defense Intelligence Agency," Elena replied, showing her real credentials for the first time. "And you just walked into the middle of a 6-month operation that could have national security implications." Before Sarah could respond, the front door burst open and Portland police officers flooded into the bar. They found 2 women standing over a crime scene that looked like something from an action movie. Both were obviously trained fighters, both were armed, and both had a lot of explaining to do. "Weapons down," the lead officer shouted. "Everyone on the ground." Elena raised her hands, displaying her federal credentials. "Agent Elena Vasquez, Defense Intelligence Agency. I'm going to reach for my identification." The next hour became a blur of questions, statements, and bureaucratic complications. Elena had to contact her superiors to verify her identity and explain how a routine surveillance operation had turned into a shootout. Sarah found herself in an interrogation room, trying to explain why a medically discharged Marine with PTSD had been involved in a gunfight. But the most complicated part was yet to come. As the police processed the scene and 3 days after the shootout at Murphy's Tavern, Sarah Mitchell sat in a sterile conference room at the Portland Federal Building, staring across the table at people who would determine the rest of her life. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting everything in an harsh, institutional glow that reminded her uncomfortably of military briefing rooms. Agent Elena Vasquez sat to her right, no longer disguised as a wealthy businesswoman. In her standard-issue dark suit, and with her hair pulled back severely, she looked every inch the federal agent she was. But Sarah could still see traces of the woman she had helped in the bar, the subtle tension around her eyes, the way she held herself ready for action even in this supposedly safe environment. Across from them sat Director James Harrison of the DIA's Pacific Northwest Division, a man in his 50s whose gray hair and lined face spoke of decades in intelligence work. Beside him was Special Agent Rebecca Chun from the FBI's Organized Crime Task Force. And at the head of the table, General Patricia Hawkins, Sarah's former commanding officer who had driven down from Joint Base Lewis McChord specifically for this meeting. "Let me make sure I understand this correctly," Director Harrison said, consulting a thick file. "Sergeant Mitchell, you were medically discharged 3 weeks ago for combat-related PTSD. You went to Murphy's Tavern to drink alone, witnessed what you believed was an assault in progress, and intervened using lethal force." Sarah nodded. "That's correct, sir. And, Agent Vasquez," Harrison continued, "you were deep undercover investigating a weapons trafficking network when Sergeant Mitchell's intervention compromised your operation and forced you to reveal your true identity." "Yes, sir," Elena replied, "though I should note that Sergeant Mitchell's actions likely saved my life. The situation had escalated beyond my ability to control through nonviolent means." General Hawkins leaned forward. "Sarah, your service record is exemplary. 3 tours, 2 Purple Hearts, a Silver Star. Your squad leaders consistently rated you as one of the finest soldiers they'd ever commanded. But your discharge was necessary because of documented incidents of excessive force during your final tour." The words stung because they were true. Sarah's last deployment had been marked by increasingly aggressive behavior, a tendency to shoot first and ask questions later that had alarmed her superiors. The psychological evaluation that led to her discharge had identified classic symptoms of combat stress reaction combined with survivors' guilt from losing most of her squad in an IED attack. "With respect, ma'am," Sarah said carefully, "my actions at Murphy's were defensive in nature. I was protecting a civilian from assault." "Were you?" FBI agent Chen asked, speaking for the first time. Her tone was neutral, but Sarah could sense skepticism. "According to witnesses, you used overwhelming force against 3 men who, while aggressive, were not armed at the time of your initial contact." Sarah felt her temper flare, but forced herself to remain calm. "In my assessment, the situation was escalating towards sexual assault. I gave verbal warnings that were ignored. Under Oregon law, I was justified in using reasonable force to defend another person." "Reasonable force," Chen repeated. "You put 1 man in intensive care with a fractured skull, broke another's ribs, and gave the 3rd a concussion that required 12 stitches. All within the span of 5 seconds. Agent Chun," Elena interjected, "I was there. Those men were part of Mickey Torino's crew, and they were not going to be dissuaded by polite conversation. Sergeant Mitchell's intervention was proportionate to the threat level." Harrison raised a hand to stop the discussion. "The legality of the initial confrontation is not our primary concern here. What matters is what happened afterward, and more importantly, what we do next." He opened another file and spread photographs across the table. Sarah recognized Mickey Torino, but the other faces were unfamiliar, men and women of various ages and nationalities, all with the hard look of career criminals. "This is what Agent Vasquez was investigating," Harrison explained. "A weapons trafficking network that moves military-grade hardware from overseas manufacturers to domestic buyers. We're talking about assault rifles, explosives, even shoulder-fired missiles. The kind of weapons that could be used in terrorist attacks or mass casualties events." Sarah studied the photographs with professional interest. Her infantry training had included extensive weapons identification, and she could see that these were serious armaments. "Who are they selling to?" "That's what we were trying to find out," Elena said. "The network has connections to several domestic terrorist groups, militia movements, and organized crime families. But the real concern is that some of the weapons appear to be ending up in the hands of foreign agents operating on U.S. soil." General Hawkins pointed to one of the photographs. "This man is Colonel Viktor Petrov, formerly of Russian military intelligence, now operating as a freelance arms dealer. He was scheduled to meet with Torino's group next week to finalize a deal for a shipment of weapons coming in through the port of Seattle." "Was scheduled?" Sarah asked. "Torino's dead," Harrison said bluntly. "Killed in his cell at the county jail 2 days ago. Made to look like suicide, but we know better. Someone wanted to make sure he couldn't talk." The news hit both women like a physical blow. Elena had spent months building relationships within Torino's organization, and now her primary target was dead. Sarah realized that her impulsive decision to help a stranger had led to consequences far beyond anything she had imagined. The point is, Harrison continued, your actions at Murphy's have exposed a network that has been operating under our radar for years. But they've also put both of you in considerable danger. Petrov and his associates are now aware that federal agents are closing in on their operation. Agent Chen pulled out her tablet and showed them a series of surveillance photographs. These were taken outside your apartment yesterday morning, Sergeant Mitchell. And Agent Vasquez, these are from your hotel. The photographs showed men with the unmistakable bearing of professional killers conducting surveillance on both women. Sarah recognized the type from her military service. Former Special Forces operators turned mercenaries, the kind of people who killed for money and never asked questions about their targets. They're planning to eliminate both of you, Harrison said matter-of-factly. Petrov can't afford to have federal agents who know about his operation running around loose. Normally, we would put you both in protective custody until we could roll up the entire network. Normally, Elena asked, catching the implication. General Hawkins answered. Unfortunately, we have reason to believe that Petrov's network has been receiving inside information from someone within federal law enforcement. How else would they have known to eliminate Torino so quickly? How would they have identified both of you so rapidly after the incident? Sarah felt her stomach drop. You think there's a mole? We're certain of it, Harrison replied. Which means traditional protective custody isn't an option. We don't know who we can trust within the system. Elena was already thinking several steps ahead. You want us to go underground. Continue the operation outside official channels. Exactly, Harrison said. Agent Vasquez, your cover is blown, but your knowledge of the network is invaluable. Sergeant Mitchell, your skills and background make you an ideal partner for this type of operation. Together, you might be able to accomplish what our entire task force couldn't. Sarah looked at Elena, then back at the assembled officials. And if we refuse? Then you'll be dead within a week, Agent Chen said bluntly. Petrov doesn't leave loose ends, and he has the resources to reach you anywhere in the country. Your only chance of survival is to stay ahead of him while working to bring down his network. The room fell silent as both women processed the implications. Sarah had joined the Marines to serve her country, and even her medical discharge hadn't changed her fundamental desire to protect innocent people. But this was different from military service. This would be operating in the shadows, without backup or official support. Elena was thinking about the months of work that had led to this moment. She had sacrificed her personal life, her relationships, even her sense of self to build her cover identity. The thought of abandoning the operation now, even with her cover blown, was almost unbearable. What exactly are you proposing? Elena asked. Harrison leaned back in his chair. Officially, both of you have died. Agent Vasquez was killed in the Murphy's Tavern shootout, and Sergeant Mitchell was a victim of a revenge killing 2 days later. Your deaths will be reported in the news, complete with funeral services and grieving families. Sarah thought about her parents, who had already endured years of worrying about their daughter's deployments. My family will think I'm dead. It's the only way to protect them, General Hawkins said gently. If Petrov's people believe you're dead, they won't target your loved ones to get to you. And unofficially? Elena prompted. Unofficially, you'll be given new identities, unlimited operational funds, and complete autonomy to pursue Petrov's network however you see fit. You'll report only to me, and even I won't know your exact location or methods. You'll be ghosts, operating completely off the grid. Agent Chen added, the weapons shipment Petrov was expecting is still coming in. Our intelligence suggests it will arrive at the port of Seattle within the next 2 weeks. That's your target. Stop the shipment, identify the domestic buyers, and eliminate Petrov's network. Sarah looked around the table at the faces of people who were asking her to give up everything she had left, her identity, her family, her hope of a normal civilian life. But they were also offering her something she hadn't expected to find again: purpose. What kind of support would we have? She asked. Financial support will be handled through encrypted accounts that can't be traced back to any government agency, Harrison explained. Equipment and weapons can be arranged through contractors who won't ask questions. Safe houses are available in multiple cities. But once you're operational, you'll be completely on your own. Elena was studying the photographs of Petrov and his associates. What's our timeline? The weapons shipment is scheduled to arrive in 10 days, Agent Chen replied. After that, the trail goes cold. This is our one chance to catch them with the evidence we need for prosecution. Assuming we live long enough to testify, Sarah muttered. General Hawkins looked at her former soldier with something approaching pride. Sarah, I've read every after-action report from your deployments. You've survived situations that would have killed most people. And you've never abandoned a mission or left a teammate behind. This isn't different from what you've already done. You're just fighting for your country on a different battlefield. The appeal to her military service was effective, and Sarah knew it. Despite everything she had been through, despite the PTSD and the medical discharge, she was still a Marine at heart. The idea of walking away while weapons that could kill innocent Americans were being smuggled into the country was almost inconceivable. If we do this, Elena said slowly, we do it our way. No oversight, no second-guessing, no bureaucratic interference. Agreed, Harrison nodded. Results are all that matter. Sarah looked at Elena, seeing her own thoughts reflected in the other woman's eyes. They were both being asked to sacrifice everything for a mission that might very well kill them. But they were also being given a chance to make a real difference, to stop something that could result in massive loss of life. Partners? Elena asked quietly. Partners, Sarah agreed. Harrison smiled for the first time since the meeting began. Excellent. Your new identities and operational funds will be ready tomorrow morning. Agent Chun will brief you on the intelligence we have about Petrov's network and the incoming weapons shipment. General Hawkins will handle the arrangements for your deaths and funeral services. One more thing, Sarah said. After this is over, assuming we survive, what happens then? That depends entirely on how well you perform, Harrison replied. The DI is always looking for experienced operatives who can work outside normal channels. Your military background and Agent Vasquez's intelligence training make you an ideal team for certain types of operations. Elena caught the implication immediately. You're talking about a permanent assignment. I'm talking about a new career, Harrison said. One that would allow both of you to serve your country in ways the traditional military and intelligence services can't. But that's a conversation for after you've completed this mission. As the meeting broke up, Sarah found herself walking out of the federal building beside Elena, both of them acutely aware that they were about to embark on something that would either make them or destroy them. The Portland streets looked different now, full of potential threats and surveillance opportunities. Any second thoughts? Elena asked as they reached the parking garage. Sarah thought about her empty apartment, her twice-weekly therapy sessions, her struggle to find meaning in civilian life. No, she said firmly. For the first time since my discharge, I feel like I'm doing something that matters. 2 weeks later, the woman who had once been Sarah Mitchell crouched on a rooftop overlooking the port of Seattle, her body perfectly still as she observed the cargo ship through high-powered binoculars. The rain that fell steadily on the Pacific Northwest had soaked through her black tactical clothing, but she ignored the discomfort. She was no longer Sarah Mitchell, former Marine with PTSD. According to her new identification, she was Alex Stone, private security contractor with a background in military logistics. Her partner, the woman formerly known as Elena Vasquez, now went by the name Morgan Harper. She lay beside Sarah on the gravel rooftop, operating a sophisticated surveillance setup that could intercept communications and track movement patterns. The expensive businesswoman persona was gone, replaced by someone who looked like she belonged in the shadows of the criminal underworld. Target vessel is the MV Konstantin, Elena murmured into her throat microphone. Russian flag cargo ship that left Vladivostok 18 days ago. She's requesting berth assignment at Terminal 46. Through her binoculars, Sarah watched the massive container ship navigate through Elliott Bay. Somewhere in one of those hundreds of shipping containers was enough firepower to equip a small army. Their mission was to identify which container held the weapons, track where they went after unloading, and identify everyone involved in the transfer. Movement on the dock, Sarah reported. 3 black SUVs, positions Alpha through Charlie. At least 6 individuals, possibly more in the vehicles. They had been watching the port for 3 days, learning the routines and identifying the players. Colonel Viktor Petrov had arrived in Seattle 48 hours earlier, along with a team of former Russian Special Forces operators who now worked as his personal security. The man was taking no chances with this operation. Elena adjusted her surveillance equipment to focus on the new arrivals. I count 8 hostiles, all armed. Petrov is in the lead vehicle. The others look like standard muscle. Sarah felt the familiar calm that preceded combat operations. Her PTSD symptoms, which had plagued her for months, seemed to disappear when she was focused on a mission. Dr. Martinez would probably have something to say about that, but Dr. Martinez thought she was dead. Confirm positive identification on Petrov, Elena continued. Tall, gray hair, wearing a dark overcoat. He's moving toward the harbor master's office. The plan they had developed was complex, but flexible. They would track the weapons from the ship to their final destination, gathering intelligence on every person involved in the transfer. Only when they had identified the entire network would they move to intercept the shipment and neutralize the threat. But plans rarely survive contact with the enemy, and this one was about to encounter a complication neither woman had anticipated. Sarah, Elena said, tension creeping into her voice. We've got federal vehicles approaching from the east. FBI tactical units by the look of them. Sarah swung her binoculars toward the approaching convoy. Confirmed. 6 vehicles, full tactical response team. Estimated 30 agents. She paused, processing the implications. Someone leaked the operation. They had specifically avoided informing any federal agencies about their surveillance, knowing that Petrov had sources within law enforcement. But, somehow, someone had learned about the weapons shipment and decided to mount their own interdiction operation. This is about to turn into a massacre, Elena said grimly. Petrov's team won't surrender, and the FBI doesn't know what they're walking into. Sarah was already reaching for her equipment bag. We can't let them engage. Too many innocent civilians in the area, and if those weapons get scattered in a firefight, we'll never track them all down. Elena was thinking the same thing. We need to intervene, but we can't blow our cover identities. If the FBI learns we're alive, word will get back to whoever's been leaking information to Petrov. Then, we do this the hard way, Sarah said, pulling on her tactical vest. Take down Petrov's team before the feds arrive, secure the weapons, and disappear before anyone can identify us. It was exactly the kind of high-risk operation that had gotten Sarah medically discharged from the Marines. The old Sarah would have called for backup, followed protocol, waited for proper authorization. But the old Sarah was dead, and the woman who had taken her place was operating under different rules. Elena was already packing up her surveillance equipment. We've got maybe 10 minutes before the FBI gets into position. Petrov's people are professionals. They'll have escape routes planned and contingencies in place. Not if we take them fast and hard, Sarah replied. Military precision, overwhelming force, no survivors to report what happened. They moved quickly but carefully down from their rooftop observation post, using fire escapes and service corridors to reach street level without being observed. Sarah's infantry training combined with Elena's intelligence fieldwork created a synergy that made them nearly invisible as they approached the target area. The port of Seattle at night was a maze of containers, cranes, and industrial equipment. Sarah and Elena used the terrain to their advantage, moving through shadows and blind spots toward the berth where the MV Konstantin was preparing to dock. Petrov set up a perimeter. Elena observed through her scope. 2-man teams at each approach route, overwatch position on that crane, and a mobile patrol along the waterfront. Sarah studied the tactical situation with professional appreciation. Good fields of fire, multiple escape routes, communication between all positions. These guys know what they're doing. The question is, do we? Elena asked quietly. It was a fair question. They were about to engage 8 heavily armed professionals with extensive military training, while simultaneously trying to stay ahead of an FBI tactical response team that would shoot first and ask questions later if they encountered armed resistance. Too late for second thoughts, Sarah replied, checking her weapons. She carried a suppressed $416 Hong Kong dollars assault rifle, a Glock 19 sidearm, and enough ammunition for a sustained firefight. Elena was similarly equipped, though her weapon of choice was the more compact HK-MP7 submachine gun. Targets of opportunity, Elena said, settling into her role as the team's intelligence specialist. Take down the perimeter teams first, then the Overwatch, then Petrov and his immediate security. Copy that, Sarah replied. I'll take the two-man team at Grid Reference Alpha. You handle the team at Bravo. Simultaneous engagement in 3, 2, 1, execute. The suppressed weapons made only soft coughing sounds as they fired, but the effect on Petrov's security perimeter was immediate and devastating. Both two-man teams dropped without having a chance to raise an alarm, their bodies falling behind shipping containers where they wouldn't be immediately discovered. Perimeter teams down, Sarah reported. Moving to Overwatch position. Elena was already in motion, using her knowledge of Petrov's operational methods to predict where his people would be positioned. Overwatch Sniper is in the crane operator's booth, elevation 30 feet, clear field of fire over the entire dock area. I see him, Sarah replied. She was moving through the maze of containers like a ghost, her military training allowing her to navigate the complex terrain without making any noise. The sniper was focused on the approaches to the dock, not watching for threats from below his position. Sarah's shot took the sniper through the back of the head, a clean kill that left him slumped over his rifle. Overwatch neutralized, moving toward primary target. But Petrov was no longer where they had last seen him. The Russian colonel had not survived decades in military intelligence by being predictable. While Sarah and Elena had been eliminating his outer security, he had moved to a more defensible position near the ship itself. Sarah, we've got a problem, Elena called over their communications link. FBI is moving into position ahead of schedule. Estimate 5 minutes before they establish their perimeter. And I've lost sight of Petrov, Sarah replied. He's either on the ship or in one of the dock buildings. The tactical situation was deteriorating rapidly. They had neutralized most of Petrov's security team, but the primary target had escaped their immediate surveillance. The FBI was approaching, which meant their window of opportunity was closing. And somewhere in the massive cargo ship, enough weapons to arm a terrorist army were waiting to be unloaded. Elena made a command decision. I'm going aboard the ship to locate the weapons container. You find Petrov and finish him before the feds arrive. Negative, Sarah replied immediately. We stick together. That ship could be a death trap if Petrov's people are waiting inside. We don't have time to clear it systematically, Elena argued. And if the FBI gets here before we locate those weapons, we'll have accomplished nothing. Sarah knew Elena was right, but the idea of splitting up in hostile territory went against every military doctrine she had learned. Partners watched each other's backs. You never left someone behind. You never operated alone if you could avoid it. But this wasn't a military operation, and normal rules didn't apply. 5 minutes, Sarah agreed reluctantly. If you're not back by then, I'm coming after you. FBI or no FBI. Elena was already moving toward the ship's gangway. Understood. Watch yourself, Sarah. Petrov didn't build his reputation by running from fights. As Elena disappeared into the cargo ship's superstructure, Sarah began a systematic search of the dock buildings where Petrov might have taken shelter. Her 416 Hong Kong dollars was ready for immediate action, and her senses were heightened to combat levels. The first building she checked was a maintenance facility filled with spare parts and repair equipment. Empty. The second was a customs inspection station, also deserted. But as she approached the third building, Sarah's trained ear detected the sound of voices speaking in accented English. She moved carefully around the building's perimeter, using windows and ventilation grates to gather intelligence before making her approach. Inside, she could see Petrov and 2 remaining bodyguards studying what appeared to be shipping manifests and port schedules. FBI response was anticipated, Petrov was saying in heavily accented English. Contingency plans are already in motion. The weapons will be transferred to secondary vehicles before federal agents establish containment. One of his bodyguards, a scarred man with the bearing of a veteran soldier, looked nervous. Colonel, our security teams are not responding. Someone has eliminated our perimeter. Petrov's expression didn't change. Then, we accelerate the timeline. Contact the ship and have them begin unloading immediately. We leave in 10 minutes with or without the full shipment. Sarah realized that Elena was walking into a trap. The weapons transfer was happening ahead of schedule, and there would be armed men waiting aboard the ship. She had to choose between engaging Petrov immediately or warning her partner. The decision was made for her when her position was revealed by a fourth man she hadn't detected, another bodyguard who had been posted as a sentry outside the building. He spotted Sarah through her scope and immediately raised the alarm. Contact. Armed female, north side of the building. Sarah's response was instantaneous. Her first shot took down the sentry, but the damage was already done. Petrov and his remaining men were alerted to her presence and would now be expecting an attack. She keyed her radio. Elena, abort. They know we're here, and they're accelerating the transfer. Get out of there now. But Elena's voice came back filled with static and interference. Sarah, multiple, aboard ship. Weapons located, container number. The signal dissolved into electronic noise. Sarah realized that the ship's metal structure was interfering with their communications, which meant Elena was on her own aboard a vessel that might be filled with hostile forces. The professional part of Sarah's mind noted that this was exactly the kind of situation her PTSD had been triggered by during her final deployment, being unable to help teammates who were in danger. But instead of the paralysis and panic attacks that had characterized her recent episodes, Sarah felt only cold, focused rage. Someone was threatening her partner, and that was unacceptable. She shifted her assault rifle to full automatic and charged the building where Petrov was hiding. The next 60 seconds would later be described by FBI surveillance teams as unprecedented individual combat effectiveness. Sarah moved through the building like a force of nature, using her knowledge of room-clearing techniques and close-quarters combat to devastating effect. Petrov's first bodyguard attempted to establish a defensive position behind an overturned desk, but Sarah's approach was too fast and too aggressive. Her burst of automatic fire shredded both the desk and the man behind it. The second bodyguard tried to flank her position, but Sarah had anticipated the move and was waiting for him. A single shot to the center of mass dropped him permanently. That left Colonel Viktor Petrov alone, trapped in a storage room with nowhere to run. When Sarah kicked open the door, she found him standing calmly beside a window, apparently resigned to his fate. "You must be the woman who destroyed Torino's operation," he said in surprisingly good English. "I admit, I did not expect such defectiveness from American operatives. Where are the rest of your people?" Sarah demanded, her rifle trained on his chest. Petrov smiled coldly. "Your partner is discovering that now. My men aboard the ship have been expecting federal interference. They are prepared to defend the weapons shipment at all costs." Sarah felt ice in her veins. "How many?" "Enough," Petrov replied. "Your friend walked into a trap, and she will not be walking out." Without hesitation, Sarah put a bullet through Petrov's head. She had no time for interrogation or prisoners. Elena was in danger, and that was the only thing that mattered. She sprinted from the building toward the cargo ship. Her mind already calculating the interior of the MV Constantine was a labyrinth of narrow corridors, steep staircases, and cargo holds that stretched into darkness. Sarah moved through the ship with practiced efficiency, her rifle ready, and her senses tuned to every sound. The gunfire that had drawn her aboard was coming from somewhere deep in the vessel's belly, punctuated by the distinctive crack of Elena's HK MP7 answering heavier weapons. Sarah followed the ship's main corridor toward the cargo holds, using her tactical training to clear each intersection and doorway before advancing. The vessel's metal walls amplified every sound, making it difficult to pinpoint exactly where the fighting was taking place. But as she descended into the ship's lower levels, the combat sounds became clearer and more urgent. Through an open hatch, Sarah could see into cargo hold 3, where Elena had taken cover behind a stack of shipping containers. Muzzle flashes lit up the darkness as at least 4 men with assault rifles tried to pin her down. The containers around Elena's position were being systematically destroyed by automatic weapons fire, and it was clear she wouldn't be able to hold her position much longer. Sarah quickly assessed the tactical situation. Elena was trapped in the center of the cargo hold with limited cover and no apparent escape route. Her attackers were positioned at the hold's entrance and along elevated catwalks that gave them superior fields of fire. It was a textbook kill zone, and Elena was running out of options. But Sarah had advantages her enemies didn't know about. They were focused entirely on Elena's position, which meant they weren't watching for threats from other directions. And Sarah's approach had been silent enough that they had no idea she was aboard the ship. She found what she needed on the next deck up, an access hatch that led to the maintenance catwalks running above cargo hold 3. From there, she would be able to attack the gunmen from above while they were focused on Elena below. Moving like a ghost, Sarah made her way through the ship's maintenance areas until she was directly above the firefight. Through the metal grating beneath her feet, she could see the 4 men who were trying to kill her partner. They had Elena pinned down effectively, but they had made the classic mistake of assuming their target was alone. Sarah's first shot took out the man positioned on the catwalk directly across from her position. He tumbled over the railing and crashed to the cargo hold floor 30 feet below. The sound of his fall alerted the other gunmen that they were under attack from a new direction, but by then, Sarah was already moving to her next firing position. Sarah, Elena's voice carried clearly through the hold. Center position, behind the red container. Elena had spotted one of the gunmen that Sarah couldn't see from her elevated position. Without hesitation, Sarah shifted her aim and put 3 rounds through the container where Elena had indicated. The distinctive sound of a body hitting the floor confirmed the hit. Now there were only 2 hostile forces left, and they were caught between Sarah's elevated position and Elena's ground-level fire. The tactical advantage had shifted completely, and both women pressed their attack with professional ruthlessness. Elena broke from cover, moving aggressively toward the remaining gunmen, while Sarah provided suppressing fire from above. The coordination between them was seamless, as if they had been working together for years instead of weeks. Elena's intelligence training complemented Sarah's military experience perfectly, creating a partnership that was greater than the sum of its parts. The last 2 gunmen fell within seconds of each other. Caught in a crossfire, they had no hope of surviving. The cargo hold fell silent except for the sound of spent brass casings settling on the metal floor. "Clear," Elena called out. "Clear," Sarah responded, already moving toward the access ladder that would take her back to the cargo hold level. When they met among the scattered containers, both women were breathing hard but uninjured. Elena's face was streaked with sweat and gun smoke, and her tactical vest showed several impact marks where bullets had struck her body armor. "You okay?" Sarah asked, quickly checking Elena for wounds. "I'm fine," Elena replied, though her hands were shaking slightly from adrenaline. "They were waiting for me. Petrov must have anticipated that someone would come aboard looking for the weapons." "Petrov's dead," Sarah said simply. "But we need to find those weapons and get out of here before the FBI decides to board this ship." Elena pointed to a cluster of containers in the far corner of the hold. "Container MSKU 789456. I managed to confirm it before the shooting started. Military-grade weapons, explosives, and ammunition. Enough to supply a small army." Sarah examined the container, noting its reinforced construction and electronic locking system. "We need to document what's inside before the feds take over. Once they get involved, this evidence might disappear into some bureaucratic black hole." Elena was already pulling out a small camera designed for intelligence documentation. "Give me 5 minutes to photograph the contents. Then, we get off this ship and let the FBI deal with the cleanup." But as Elena worked to open the container, Sarah's attention was drawn to the sound of footsteps echoing through the ship's corridors. Heavy boots, multiple individuals, moving with the coordinated precision of a tactical team. The FBI had apparently decided not to wait for the situation to stabilize before boarding the vessel. "Elena," Sarah said quietly, "we've got company coming. Multiple contacts. Sounds like a full tactical response team." Elena paused in her work on the container lock. How long before they reached this position? Sarah listened carefully to the approaching footsteps, using her knowledge of the ship's layout to estimate their progress. 3 minutes, maybe 4. They're moving carefully, clearing each section as they advance. "Not enough time to properly document the weapons," Elena said with frustration. "But I might be able to get photos of the shipping manifests and tracking numbers. That would be enough to trace the supply chain back to its source." While Elena worked frantically with her camera, Sarah positioned herself to cover the cargo hold's main entrance. If the FBI team found them here, she would have to make split-second decisions about whether to surrender, run, or fight. None of those options appealed to her. Got it, Elena announced, finishing her documentation work. Shipping records, manifest numbers, and photos of the weapons themselves. This should be enough to trace the entire network. Time to go, Sarah replied, hearing the FBI team getting closer. Emergency exit through the engine room? Elena nodded, already moving toward a secondary hatch that would take them deeper into the ship. Their intelligence gathering had identified multiple escape routes from the vessel, and they had memorized the ship's layout in preparation for exactly this type of situation. They moved quickly but quietly through the ship's lower levels, using service corridors and maintenance areas to avoid the advancing FBI team. Behind them, they could hear the federal agents discovering the bodies in cargo hold 3 and calling for backup. "This is FBI team leader," a voice echoed through the ship's corridors. "We have multiple hostile casualties in the cargo hold. Request additional support and medical personnel." Sarah and Elena reached the engine room without being detected, where they found the emergency access hatch that led to the ship's external hull. From there, they could reach the water without being seen by the FBI teams that were now swarming over the vessel. But, as they prepared to make their escape, Elena paused. "Sarah, we're leaving evidence behind. Those weapons, Petrov's organization, the connection to domestic buyers. The FBI might not be able to piece it all together." Sarah understood Elena's concern. They had spent weeks building this operation, and walking away now meant trusting that federal bureaucracy would be able to complete what they had started. Given the security leaks that had already compromised the mission, that trust was not well-founded. "What are you suggesting?" Sarah asked. Elena pulled out a small device that looked like a standard smartphone, but was actually a sophisticated piece of DIA surveillance equipment. "I can upload all our intelligence directly to Director Harrison's secure server. Photos, shipping records, communication intercepts, everything we've gathered about Petrov's network." "Won't that expose our location?" "Not if we're smart about it," Elena replied. "The upload will route through multiple encrypted relays before reaching Harrison. By the time anyone could trace the signal back to its origin, we'll be long gone." Sarah considered the risks and benefits. Transmitting their intelligence would ensure that the mission's objectives were accomplished, but it would also reveal to their handlers that they were still operational in the Seattle area. That information could potentially be leaked to the same sources that had been feeding intelligence to Petrov. But the alternative was allowing a weapons trafficking network to continue operating, potentially supplying armaments to terrorist organizations or domestic extremist groups. When viewed from that perspective, the personal risk was acceptable. "Do it," Sarah decided. Elena activated her device and began the upload process while Sarah kept watch on the access points to their position. The engine room was filled with the sound of heavy machinery, which helped mask any noise they were making, but also made it difficult to hear approaching threats. "Upload complete," Elena announced. "Harrison should have everything we've gathered within the next few minutes." "Then, let's get out of here," Sarah replied. They opened the emergency hatch and found themselves on a maintenance platform attached to the ship's hull, about 20 feet above the dark waters of Elliott Bay. The platform was designed for emergency evacuation, with a deployable ladder that could be lowered to water level. But, as they prepared to deploy the ladder, searchlights suddenly blazed to life from FBI patrol boats positioned around the cargo ship. The federal agents had apparently anticipated that anyone aboard the vessel might try to escape by water. "Federal agents," a voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "You are surrounded. Surrender immediately, and you will not be harmed." Sarah and Elena found themselves caught in the glare of multiple searchlights, their position completely exposed. They were trapped between the FBI team aboard the ship and the patrol boats in the water below. Surrender seemed like the only rational option. But surrender would mean the end of their off-the-books operation and possibly their lives if the intelligence leaks within federal law enforcement continued. They would be processed through official channels. Their fake identities would be exposed, and anyone looking for them would know exactly where to find them. "Ideas?" Sarah asked quietly. Elena was studying the patrol boats' positions, looking for gaps in their coverage. "The boats are positioned to cover the obvious escape routes, but they're not expecting anyone to go toward the shore. If we can make it to the dock area, we might be able to disappear in the industrial complex. It was a desperate plan, but desperate times called for desperate measures. Sarah looked at the distance between their position and the nearest dock, about 200 yards of open water that would have to be covered while under observation by federal agents. That's a long swim while people are shooting at us, Sarah observed. Better than the alternatives, Elena replied. Before Sarah could respond, Elena had already gone over the side of the platform and into the water. After a moment's hesitation, Sarah followed her partner into Elliott Bay's cold, dark waters. The swim to shore was the longest 200 yards of both women's lives. FBI searchlights tracked their progress through the water while patrol boat engines roared to life in pursuit. But the dock area was a maze of pilings, abandoned equipment, and industrial debris that provided cover for anyone who knew how to use it. Sarah and Elena reached the shore exhausted and soaked, but alive and free. Behind them, FBI agents were coordinating search efforts that would continue for hours, but ultimately prove fruitless. The two women had simply vanished into the Seattle night like ghosts. 3 hours later, they sat in a 24-hour diner approach routes and tactical options. Behind her, she could hear the sound of FBI vehicles arriving at the port, but she ignored them. Let them secure the crime scene. She had a partner to save. As she reached the ship's gangway, Sarah could hear the sound of automatic weapons fire coming from deep within the vessel's cargo holds. Elena was still alive and fighting, but she was outnumbered and trapped in an environment that favored the defenders. Sarah paused at the entrance to the ship, checking her ammunition and preparing for what was likely to be the most dangerous few minutes of her life. She thought briefly about calling for backup, about waiting for the FBI tactical team to arrive and provide support. Instead, she stepped aboard the MV Constantine and disappeared into its maze-like interior, following the sound of gunfire toward whatever hell Elena had found herself in. Good, Elena replied. Because once we start down this road, there's no going back. We'll either succeed together or die together. I can live with those odds, Sarah said, then caught herself and laughed. Poor choice of words. Elena smiled, and for the first time since they had met, Sarah saw something other than professional composure in her eyes. I think we're going to work well together, Sergeant Mitchell. Just Sarah now, she replied. That other person is about to die, remember? 24 hours later, the newspapers would report that former Marine Sergeant Sarah Mitchell had been killed in an apparent revenge attack connected to the Murphy's Tavern shooting, and that DIA agent Elena Vasquez had succumbed to injuries sustained in that same incident. Their funerals would be attended by grieving families and former colleagues who would never know that both women were very much alive and preparing for the most dangerous mission of their lives. Federal agents took control of the investigation. Elena realized that Sarah Mitchell represented both a massive security breach and a potential asset. Someone with her skills and background could be valuable to the DI, especially given how effectively she had performed under pressure. Sarah, meanwhile, was struggling with the implications of what had happened. For the first time since her discharge, she had felt truly alive, truly useful. The PTSD symptoms that had plagued her for months seemed to fade away when she was in combat mode. But she also knew that what she had done was illegal, dangerous, and potentially catastrophic for her attempts to rebuild her civilian life. As dawn broke over Portland, both women sat in separate interview rooms, their lives forever changed by a chance encounter in a dive bar. Neither knew that their story was just beginning, that the forces Mickey Torino had warned them about were already mobilizing, and that their partnership would soon become a matter of survival rather than choice. The weapons trafficking ring they had stumbled into was indeed much larger than anyone realized, with connections that reached into the highest levels of government and military contracting. Sarah's involvement had been random, but Elena's cover had been blown so completely that extraction was no longer an option. They would have to work together to survive what was coming next. What did you see? Torino demanded, stepping closer. Elena's hand moved imperceptibly closer to her concealed weapon as she prepared her response. Everything she had worked for over the past 6 months hung in the balance. One wrong word, one slip in her cover story, and the entire operation would be blown. But As she looked into Torino's suspicious eyes, Elena realized that the mysterious Marine who had just walked out might have already destroyed everything anyway.